Excellence is the quality of being extraordinary or extremely good. Scaling up excellence is a concept introduced by our next breakthrough thinker. Let me invite Hayagreeva, the professor of organizational behavior and human resources of Stanford Graduate School of Business, as our next breakthrough thinker.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's a delight to be here. And I always usually like to begin with a confession. I'm an accidental professor. I used to sit in the very last row of class when I was finishing business school in India. And three of the textbooks that we had to follow were from Stanford. And if you asked me in 1980, I'd actually be here at Stanford, I'd have instantly told you, can you please tell me what is it you're smoking so that I could even learn about that? So I'm really a very accidental professor. So what I'd like to do in the 15 minutes given to me is I'd actually like to make two arguments. I want to leave you with one simple technique that you can use when you go back to your own organizations. So the theme of my talk is scaling up without screwing up. Let's hope, yeah. I'll just kind of reset this in a little while. Yeah. So scaling up without screwing up. That's actually the title of the talk. And as Vipin very nicely alluded to it, the theme, of course, the underlying theme is scaling up excellence. When I ask people what is excellence, they usually tell me it's beating a benchmark, it's being a consistent high performer, it's being an organization that customers love, an organization where employees like to work in. My colleague Bob Sutton, with whom I had the pleasure of writing the book called Scaling Up Excellence, he and I are social scientists, and what we are interested in is, what is it that allows you to be best in class? What is it that allows you to be innovative? What is it that allows you to be bigger, but much more importantly, better? And our view of excellence is a very behavioral view. For us, an excellent organization is one where people do the right thing even if you're not watching them over their shoulder. That's what an excellent organization is. Imagine, for every 10 people you hire, can you afford to hire 3 policemen? By the time you're up to 30, you've got 9 cops, and you're then thinking, we need a super cop to manage the cops, and you're in gridlock land. So you really want to build an organization where people do the right thing. At Stanford, I direct a program for the Young Presidents Organization. And a couple of years ago, we had the president of Plantronics. They have a 3,000-worker plant in Tijuana, Mexico. Most of them they haven't even been to high school. And I said, how do you build an organization where people do the right thing even when nobody is watching over their shoulder? He looked at me and said, Professor, we've tried a bunch of things. The thing that works the best really is when I decided to give all of my blue-collar workers their own business cards. I said, that's a cute idea, but what the hell does that do? And he looked at me and said, previously, if you asked one of my workers, what do? They'd look at you blankly and say, I work for Plantronics. Now, if one of their acquaintances asks them, what is it you do? They immediately fish the business card out and they say, that's what I'm responsible for. That's my job. That's the department where I work in. So we often think of a business card as introducing ourselves to somebody. But here's a simple but clever example of using it as a flashlight on accountability. So what's the main argument? The main argument is when we scale, we usually think of footprint, revenue, profit, number of customers, number of products, head count of employees, you name it. Our main argument is you can't just think of footprint, you've really got to think about the mindset. What's the mindset? It's actually being poised to act. Let me give you a simple but quick study. So this was actually done in a Midwestern state. They wanted people to turn out and vote for elections. So they randomly divided the electorate into 3 groups. One group received a postcard, everybody to my left, which told them voting is a patriotic act, please vote. Everybody in the middle, they were actually also sent a postcard that told them election day is on November 4th, please vote. Everybody to my right instead was asked a simple question, how do you plan to drive to the voting venue on election day? Predictably, people in the third group turned out to vote 20% more. And the reason is they had already simulated, they had already planned. And a lot of what we all have to do is really trigger mindsets. Here's a remarkable lady who taught me a lot about how to trigger a mindset through words. She's a person called Fifi. She works on the shop floor at a plant in Pearl River, New Jersey that's now owned by Pfizer. They make syringes, they make tablets. What she found was the 10 people under her command, they were taking a long time to do the equipment reset. And it's amazing. This organization sent Fifi for Six Sigma training. And I was watching her and saying, what would she do? Would she teach them Ishikawa fishbone diagrams or what have you? Fifi looks at these 10 men and says, hey, we have a problem. We think equipment reset is a break. We have a break mindset. One of the 10 people, the workers, looks at Fifi and say, Fifi, what do you think we should do? Without batting an eyelid, she looks at him and says, we got to do it like a pit stop. Just think of that. Just that 5-second communication instantly created a common picture in the team. She didn't have to explain anything further. That's really what a mindset is. What happens when you actually forget a mindset and only think of the footprint? Here is a mea culpa from Howard Schultz of Starbucks. And what he says is, as we moved from 1,300 to 13,000 stores, as we added new product categories, we forgot the customer experience. So the point is, without a mindset, your footprint won't survive, let alone thrive. Now, in our research, what we found is, we've found efforts to scale, be it through acquisition, be it through new product introduction, you name, whatever manifestation of scaling. Our overwhelming conclusion is efforts to scale end up in a clusterfuck. We couldn't use the 4-letter word because our publisher, Random House, prevented it. And for those of you with literary curiosity, fug is a word used by the American novelist Norman Mailer as a stand-in for the 4-letter word that we all know. So how are clusterfucks created? You multiply 3 things: illusion, impatience, incompetence. Illusion means we have mistaken presumptions, and when they're not checked, illusion hardens into impatience. And if you don't do anything about that, very quickly the smart people inside your organization, they become dumb, they become mute. And then you have incompetent people. I'm sure you've been to your share of meetings where there's an inverse correlation between idiocy and the propensity to speak frequently. So when I've asked people in the C-suite, what's a clusterfuck like? Invariably, they describe it as a surprise. And I say, give me an analogy. They compare it to a riptide. The ocean looks deceptively calm, and then what do? Before you know it, you're flailing, you're in the middle, you're drowning. What do you do to prevent a clusterfuck? And now to the technique that all of you might find helpful. If you love history, as indeed I do, and if you consult Herodotus, the Greek historian, he talks about Cyrus the great Persian emperor who scaled the Persian Empire. Apparently, before every big decision, Cyrus would get his generals, and they'd actually debate the issue over copious amounts of alcohol. The next day, they would re-debate the same issue when everybody was sober. We all know that alcohol removes inhibitions. You put truth on the table. There's a minor problem. The minor problem is we can't remember what was said. I'm sure all of you have had that experience. So when we are sober, we're very strategic. Constantly we're thinking, what's that other person going to think about what I'm going to say? And we're going to filter what we do. So we, of course, don't suggest, as you make scaling decisions, you imbibe vast quantities of alcohol and contemplate them. Instead, what we recommend is you do something called a pre-mortem. The pre-mortem is the opposite of the post-mortem. We do a post-mortem when there's been a debacle. In a pre-mortem, what we're doing is essentially what the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard mentioned many years ago. He said the best way to understand the future is to live it backward. And the basic idea behind the pre-mortem is, even before anything has happened, we either imagine it to be a disaster or alternatively imagine it to be a success. And then we ask people to write down a story of all the events that led either to the failure or the success. The pre-mortem idea uses a psychological technique called prospective hindsight. In a beautiful study done in 1989, they actually took a number of students at the University of Pennsylvania, randomly put them into two groups. One group of people were told, hey, here is this mid-level manager. He might quit the job in 7 months. The other group was told, here is a middle manager. He has quit the organization after 7 months. And both groups were asked to write, give us reasons, all the reasons that led to the quit decision. Amazingly, people who were told that the person had already quit wrote close to 40% more reasons. And the reason is not because of temporal variation, but they were actually given something certain. When we actually have a certain outcome, we're much better at coming up with causes, multiple causes of a single outcome. Instead of asking us to give causes of multiple outcomes, much better to actually do this. So here's the technique for the pre-mortem. What you do is, don't round up the usual suspects. You randomly assign 10 people in the organization into two groups. Failure on the one hand and success on the other. I've done this in the C-suites of many organizations, but I'm under NDA, so I could give you one example of a healthcare institution in a university in the Midwest. And what happened there was they were scaling, and the dean said, he's a prominent scientist, he said, look, we have scientists, they come up with ideas, the molecular biologists, we have the MDs, we have the nurses and administrators. Wouldn't it be great if they all worked together wherein the scientists came up with new drug ideas, the MDs ran clinical trials with the help of nurses and administrators, and they were going to raise $1 billion of funding. And he said, why don't you do a pre-mortem? So I told him, I said, great. Give me 10 people. I need a couple of scientists, a couple of MDs, a couple of nurses, a couple of administrators. When you write to them individually. They shouldn't know who each other is. It's got to be fully anonymous. Just tell them I'll be in contact with them. I divided them randomly into two groups. One group was told that this effort to scale their medical complex had ended in a disaster. And in order to trigger their imagination, I made up a mock headline of the New York Times that told them, your medical school is actually losing lives in clinical trials. And I told these 5 people, write a one-pager that tells you a story about the events that led to the headline. On the other side, I told people, here's a headline from the New York Times that says, you're actually going from strength to strength. Then I told those 5 people, write a one-pager of all the events that led to this successful headline. When you give people a one-page constraint, they're more likely to do it, obviously. But the other thing is they're actually going to put whatever they know the most about and whatever they care about. So when you glue the 5 one-pagers of failure, you can quickly begin to see a flow chart of all the events that culminate in failure. And the same goes, of course, for success. In the case of success, when you glue them together, they're all about the upward spiral. What did people write in these one-pagers? I'll give you 2 quick examples. One scientist wrote about how the MDs doing clinical trials didn't understand the science. So they misdiagnosed the cause of death and exposed the institution to legal jeopardy. Another doctor said, we're doing so many clinical trials, we're putting so much pressure on the postdocs. His one-pager was about postdoc fraud. What about people on the success side? Many people wrote and said, well, we succeeded because we subordinated our egos to the lives of patients. But the 2 other things were surprises to really the rest of the organization. They said, our whole effort to scale succeeded not because we hired 10 scientists from Rockefeller University and poached them. We succeeded because we hired 40 very competent nurses. And you can imagine when you scale, we often budget resources to stars. We forget about the Sherpas. And that was the point of the pre-mortem. The other thing that people sort of wrote about was, they said the reason the scaling effort succeeded was the scientists talked to the epidemiologists who knew about high-power research design. the earlier they talked, the better it would be. So when all of this was done, we actually got 100 heads of departments. I first presented to them the pre-mortem of success to lower defensiveness, and then the pre-mortem of failure. And after that, we divided everybody into groups of 5 each. There were 20 tables, and they were all told, don't make a list of 20 things you want to do. The bigger the list, the more virtuous you'll feel, but the lower the probability of doing anything. Instead, tell us the one thing you're going to stop doing. And it was amazing. Out of the 20 tables, 16 came back and told us, we have to stop doing low-power clinical trials. That's what they began. What do pre-mortems do? They short-circuit the problem of silence. They make it easy for people. It's like a ramp that allows people to communicate truth. Most of all, what a pre-mortem does is it makes sure you just don't sample what is said in an organization. You're carefully sampling the unsaid and the unmentionable. What pre-mortems do is they make sure you don't take the off-ramp to a disaster. In closing, I'd advise you to use pre-mortems selectively for important decisions. Don't use it like Tylenol for every single thing you do. Finally, what pre-mortems do is executives who scale, they're damn good at planning the wedding. Wedding in real life is about song and dance. In organizations, it's about the rollout on day one. But what employees are interested in is not the wedding, but the marriage. In real life, marriage has to do with boring things like, do we have one bank account or do we have 2 bank accounts? So how do you get executives to move from wedding mode into marriage planning mode? And the pre-mortem is a technique that helps them to do that. Thank you so very, very much.